Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Walsh. We live in some very uncertain times right now, I'll say that. And many of us might find ourselves at home more than we're accustomed to, which is fine. But instead of watching the news or figuring out ways of dealing with the boredom, we're going to put out some videos. Now, we put out a new course recently called The Cell Blueprint, and those that have already viewed it really have some great things to say about it. We're going to be adding to this course. I'm adding a whole series of videos called The Science of the Cell Blueprint. And in these videos, I'm going to go into the stuff that I love, the deep mechanistic pathways inside of a cell, for example, and how things affect one another and take place, and I'm really excited about this. But before we add it to the course, since you might be sitting around at home and are looking for things to do or watch or become smarter, rather than just sit around and watch the news, for example, we're going to be releasing them to you. So the first video, The Science of the Cell Blueprint, is going to be on the levels of organization. Now, if you're familiar with my work, you've probably seen it before. I do recommend watching these again because you can sometimes pick up some new information. If you haven't ever seen me talk about the levels of organization, I highly recommend that you do if you're a clinician, because many times it's a game changer for clinicians to view patients and clients under the lens of the levels of organization. The next video is going to be on what damages cells. If we are a bunch of cells, and if cells are dysfunctional, we're dysfunctional and unhealthy, then we need to figure out what's going to damage cells. Now, there's the obvious things like trauma. You drop a hammer on your toe and there's going to be cellular dysfunction in your toe. But what are some other things that causes cell damage and cell injury? That'll be the part of the second video. The third video I'm maybe most excited about, and that is going into the details mechanistically, intracellularly, on what happens if you don't have enough ATP. And you'll be surprised. There's a lot of stuff that happens, how a cell becomes dysfunctional for something as simple as low ATP, based on what's in the scientific literature. It's pretty awesome. And then after that, we're going to go through each one of the different components of the cell blueprint, scientifically, mechanistically, physiologically, biochemically, to show how things like high or low glucose causes cell damage, or oxygen deprivation, or mitochondrial dysfunction, or micronutrient deficiency, or xenobiotics, or infections, or all these different things, and show you how cell dysfunction actually takes place on a biological, physiological, biochemical level. So again, because of these uncertain times, we wanted to offer you some of this information while you're at home, maybe not doing things as you might normally do before we add these to the course, but I wanted to give you a little taste of this first. So I hope you enjoy the part one, levels of organization, and I hope to see you in part two as well. Okay, welcome back. So now we're going to talk about a thing that I've been talking about for a very long time, because I'll tell you the story about it, but I saw that there was a tremendous amount of wisdom for clinicians in this idea, in this old model of the levels of structural organization, which there's scientific papers on this. Even now, people talking about how we could use this in the scientific world. I saw this at the time of this recording well over a decade ago now. And I thought, man, this changed my life as a practitioner. Now, I was teaching this course, physiology course, and the levels of organization is something that's discussed usually in chapter 1 of every single physiology textbook that you can find anywhere around the world. It's typically only a few pages long, and honestly, if you take a course in physiology, you may have 1 or 2 questions on a quiz relating to this, but holy cow, there's so much wisdom in this, and this is why I'm going to walk you through this, because this changed my life as a practitioner. And I will add this one other bit. I've taught courses, weekend courses, 16-hour courses on a given topic, blood chemistry or hormones or whatever it might be. And when I ask the attendees, I say, well, what part really stood out to you? Inevitably, people will talk about this. This just, wow, it was mind-blowing, changed my eyes, changed my life. My mind on this topic. Thank you so much for that. So anyhow, this is a big topic, levels of organization, and here's what it basically does, is it answers the question of what we're made up of on a physical level in the world. And the smallest, most microscopic thing that we're made up of that can't be broken down in nature that we know of is called an atom, or a chemical, or an element. Now, these are things that you can find off the periodic chart. And we are made up of a lot of carbon, for example, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, hydrogen, oxygen,
There's also a little bit less of things like magnesium. There's also even less of things like iron and copper and selenium, and then very, very small amounts of things like arsenic and boron, but apparently even they have to be there for health, it turns out. So on the smallest, most fundamental level, in the levels of organization, we're made up of atoms, chemicals, or elements. That's it. Now, if you take an atom or a chemical or an element, a couple of them, and you bond them together, covalent bonds or different kinds of bonds that they have, and you bond these things, two things together, now we have a molecule. And a molecule, the definition is, quite simply, is two or more atoms, chemicals, or elements put together. Classic examples people think of right away are things like H2O, water. H2O, two H's and an oxygen. And those are two H's and an oxygen. Those are all atoms, chemicals, or elements, but you bind them together and now you have a molecule. CO2 comes to a lot of people's mind. Carbon dioxide or oxygen, molecular oxygen, O2. There's atomic oxygen, just no, and there's molecular oxygen, oxygen plus oxygen bound together, O2, that's the kind of oxygen that we breathe. But other things that are molecules that we talk about all the time, vitamin C is a molecule. All the B vitamins are molecules. Glucose is a molecule. A single amino acid is a molecule. When you think about the structure of these, a fatty acid is a molecule. You could even add onto that like a nucleotide. Nucleotides are molecules. ATP is a molecule. Then if you take two or more molecules and bind them together, then you get a macromolecule. Well, if glucose was a molecule, two or more of those together might be glycogen or a starch. That'd be a macromolecule. If a single amino acid is a molecule, two or more amino acids bound together would be a peptide or a protein or an enzyme. That's a macromolecule. If a fatty acid is a molecule, if we put 3 fatty acids and attach it to a glycerol molecule, that'd be a macromolecule, triglyceride, triacylglycerol. We could take 2 fatty acids, a glycerol phosphate group, and an alcohol group, and that'd be a phospholipid. That'd be a macromolecule. So what's a macromolecule? 2 or more molecules bound together. Cool. What's a molecule? 2 or more atoms, chemicals, or elements bound together. That's cool. So now we have things like phospholipids and proteins and certain carbohydrates and lipoproteins. If we put enough of these things together, we can make an organelle according to the levels of organization. And an organelle, that's just the machine bits and the part of inside of a cell. So things like the mitochondria, things like the Golgi apparatus, the smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum. You could even argue things like peroxisomes and lysosomes, the nucleus. Organelles are the machines, or the little machinery, I should say, inside of a cell. What really is the mitochondria? It's an outer membrane and an inner membrane, made up mostly of phospholipids, some proteins. The inner mitochondrial membrane is a cardiolipin, which is just a macromolecule because that's 4 fatty acids and kind of a phospholipid, but with 4 instead of just 2. So and there's proteins. So what is an organelle? It's really just a bunch of macromolecules. What's a macromolecule? 2 or more molecules. And what's a molecule? 2 or more atoms, chemicals, or elements. Sweet. So now if we take organelles, see if I have a cool marker up here, and we wrap them in a phospholipid bilayer membrane, then we make, we'll see what happens here, I never know, because of my children, a cell. Now, the reason why cell is written differently and it has a purple box around it is because that we've talked about thus far. A cell is unique. A mitochondria that we know of cannot exist by itself, or a Golgi apparatus, or a nucleus, or any of these things. But a cell, as long as, and we'll see this in just a second, I'll even write this down now. A cell, as long as it can make energy, or ATP, as long as it's able to protect itself from things that can damage it, and as long as the environment is correct, this thing can keep going. That is amazing. A cell, if it can make energy, if it can protect itself from being damaged, from things that get and if the environment is right, it can go on. It can keep existing. It's a life form. This thing, a mitochondria that we know of, can't exist by itself, or a Golgi apparatus, or the nucleus of a cell. But a cell has all the things it needs in order to survive, in order to exist, in order to not only exist but procreate. to copy itself. This is incredible. So a cell is really a bunch of what? A bunch of organelles wrapped in a phospholipid membrane, which is a bunch of macromolecules. So that's cool. We're going to keep going. But a cell is the first thing on this list that is capable of sustaining life as long as it has the energy to do so, it can protect itself, and it has the right environment. Awesome. So now, oops, and I forgot something. That's even more awesome. We'll just redirect. If you have a bunch of cells put together in the levels of organization, then you have what's called a tissue. Now, I'm not going to write them down, as you can look this up, but there's only 4 different types of tissues in the body. There is muscle, which is found in the heart and skeletal muscle and smooth muscle, but muscle's job is just to shorten and contract. There's another type of tissue that's connective tissue. That's just going to generally bind things together. Another type of tissue is neural tissue. So that's cells that have like electrical function. So neurons in a tissue, for example. And then lastly is what's called epithelial tissue. And epithelial tissue tends to line things. Now I'm not going to go into this here. This is all in level 2 physiology, functional physiology. But an epithelial tissue, which is made up of epithelial cells, tends to line things. So your skin is epithelial. What lines the stomach on the inside, that lining of the stomach is epithelial. The inner chambers of the heart, what's lined with that is epithelial. In the blood vessels or lymphatic vessels, what lines that is epithelial. But just to give you an example as we go further, so there's only 4 different kinds of tissues. When you combine 2 or more of those tissues together, then you get an organ. Well, it turns out you could almost call the blood vessels an organ when you think about it, because the blood vessels have inner epithelial lining, that's tissue number 1. They're surrounded by smooth muscle, that's tissue number 2. And they have connective tissue on the outside holding them all together, that's tissue number 3. And those that are innervated and have neurons that might be running through them, that's tissue number 4, that's an organ. You could do the same thing with the heart. It has chambers on the inside, so it's hollow, so it has epithelial. It's the heart, so it's muscle, so it's that's taken care of. It has connective tissue to bind all these things together, and it definitely has its own electrical system. So you can see that just about every organ of the body, well, every organ of the body is 2 or more tissues, but many times it's all 4. So let's start from the beginning. The levels of organization say what we're made up of on a physical, structural level that you can identify in nature. The smallest thing is atoms, chemicals, or elements off the periodic chart. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, all those things. 2 or more atoms, chemicals, or elements put together becomes a molecule. Water, carbon dioxide, but things like B vitamins, vitamin C, glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, etc. 2 or more molecules put together becomes a macromolecule. So instead of amino acid, you have a protein. Instead of a triglyceride, instead of a fatty acid, you have a triglyceride. Instead of glucose, you have starch, you have glycogen. Instead of a nucleotide, you have DNA or RNA. Then if you take a whole bunch of macromolecules and you put those together, then you get an organelle. And an organelle are the different machinery or different parts inside of a cell that makes it work. You take all those different parts and you wrap it inside a nice little phospholipid bilayer membrane, and you get a cell. Now the cell is unique because this thing can sustain life. I did make it clear earlier, this thing can sustain life. Everything prior to this that we know of cannot. So really, and then I'll go further, a bunch of cells all put together is a tissue. There's only 4 different types of tissue in the body. Epithelial lines things, neural is electrical, connective holds things together, and muscular contracts. That's it that we've identified so far. 2 or more tissues put together as an organ. You think of the stomach or the heart or the intestines or blood vessels or the lungs or the brain. Any of these things are going to apply. Now, if you take 2 or more organs that have a similar function as one another. So the stomach and the heart, they don't really have a similar function. One is to digest and one is to contract. But the esophagus in the stomach and the large intestines and the small intestines, and maybe you could even say the pancreas and the liver, those are all working together to digest things, and that's why it would be called the digestive system. The heart with the blood vessels might be called the cardiovascular system, or the muscular system, or the skeletal system, or maybe together it's the musculoskeletal system. There's the nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord and the neurons. So a system is really 2 or more organs that are trying to work together on a thing. And then lastly, and this is where physiology lives, by the way, this is all the systems of the body, respiratory system and integumentary system and the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, the immune system. You put all those systems together, and then you get what's called an organism. Now this is in this case, the human body, the human being. An organism then is really made up of what? A bunch of organ systems. If you have a bunch of organ systems, what is it really? Well, an organ system is really just a bunch of organs. Well, what is an organ then? An organ really is just 2 or more types of tissues, usually all 4. But what is a tissue really? It's a bunch of cells. And the cell is really just a bunch of organelles wrapped in a phospholipid membrane, which is really just a bunch of macromolecules, molecules, and atoms, or chemicals or elements. But now, and I'm going to take it a little further in a second. So now this, you guys, this is where this all happened for me, and I've been teaching it ever since. I saw that, so I said, well, wait a minute. So the organism is what comes into your office, right? It says, I don't feel well. Something doesn't feel well. I'm too fat, I want to get lean. I'm too little, I want to get more muscular. I have fatigue. I'm tired. My skin is I have skin issues, or my brain hurts, or I can't think right, or I'm getting too old, or I don't want to get old, or I have menopause, or my kids are, whatever it is, they're coming in, they're not happy, there's something doesn't feel right. I get gastrointestinal stuff. Cool. So somebody comes in, an organism comes in, and they don't feel well, something's wrong. Well, what we do is you think, all right, well, you come in and you say you're having a lot of senior moments lately. All right, well, it's probably not your immune system or your cardiovascular system. And I know people can make arguments, but it's probably not your endocrine system. If you feel like your brain's not working, I'm going to say it's probably your nervous system. But the nervous system, it's not the whole nervous system. It's probably just part of it. So I'll probably say the brain, which is an organ. Well, it's not the entire brain that's having a problem. It's probably one of the different tissues inside of the brain. But it's not just the whole tissue, because the tissue is really just made up of a bunch of cells. And I saw that. I was like, that was cool. Let me do it again. And someone comes in a woman comes in and she's having a hard time getting pregnant. And you're like, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but let's see. Let's try to figure this out. Like, why are you having a hard time getting pregnant? Probably not your cardiovascular system, or your nervous system, or your integumentary system. I'm going to start probably with the endocrine system, right? Hormones, female hormones. You're having a hard time getting pregnant. Estrogen, progesterone. So it's probably not the whole thing that's dysfunctional. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's start with the endocrine system. Well, it's not the whole endocrine system, because that would be the thymus too, and the pancreas, and the pineal gland, and all those things. Well, it's probably maybe your ovaries. I'm going to go with your ovaries. But the ovaries is an organ, is really just what? 4 different types of tissues. Well, let me think about it then. So what in the ovary is probably dysfunctional? Is it the connective tissue that's making you have a hard time getting pregnant? Probably not. Is it the muscle tissue in the ovaries? Hardly any. So no, it's probably not it either. The neural tissue? Not really. Hormones are made by and converted by epithelial tissue. And so it's probably the epithelial tissue, but it's not the whole epithelial tissue, because tissue is really just a bunch of cells. And so, ma'am, having a hard time getting pregnant, I think you have some cells in your body that aren't working well. And I did it again. I did it with diabetes. I did it with so many different conditions. And I thought, man, are you kidding me? You're telling me that anybody that walks into my office is not the condition. And I don't have to be an expert in PCOS and Alzheimer's and diabetes and fatty, whatever it is, ad nauseum, and all the diets for this, and all the protocols and supplements for this. But all they're really telling me is that, and this is as God is my witness, and this is the truth. I looked at that, I thought, wow, I can get around this. Because all the things that we're supposed to know all about today, and we need to know a bit, but all of a sudden, because I needed to go to the brain seminar, and the thyroid seminar, and the gut seminar, and the liver seminar, and the PCOS seminar, and the autoimmune seminar. I had to do all these things. But when I saw this, I thought, well, wait a minute. And you can't really argue with this. If somebody's not feeling well, it's not the whole body. It's one of the systems, or maybe a couple of them, but it's not the whole system. It's probably only just 1 or 2 of the organs in it. And it's the whole organ is definitely not the case. There's some tissues that are dysfunctional in it. And the tissue is really just a bunch of cells. I thought, man, now that is awesome. And then I also went backwards. And again, try to argue with this. But if 100% of the cells are healthy and they make tissues, then what has to be healthy? The tissues. If all the cells are healthy and functioning properly, then all the tissues will be healthy too. And if all the tissues are healthy, then you have to have healthy organs. And if all your organs are healthy, then the organ system is going to be healthy that they're associated with. And if every single organ system is healthy, then so too is the organism. And I did it backwards and forwards, and I thought this is the coolest thing I've ever come across, because I don't need to be an expert in a gland or a thing or a hormone or a pathway or a test or whatever. I just have to know what the heck, how to make their cells healthier. And maybe we're so excited about these new pathways and mechanisms and tests and all these things that we're missing some fundamental things that people need in order to have healthy cells. Okay, let me take it a little further, and then I'm going to do something else. According to the levels of organization, now most physiology textbooks stop here, but you can see in other literature that it takes it further. 2 or more of the same organism is a population. So 2 or more humans is going to be a population. This is the human population. 2 or more dogs will make the dog population. 2 or more populations makes a community. And there are references that take it further than this, but this is as far as I need to take this, because there's a couple of things here. Number 1, I'll just put a little thing here. If all we do is just focus on the human by itself, then I think we're going to fail. Because it turns out that how this human feels about themselves in this larger population of this larger community of, let's just call it the world at this point, how they feel about their place in this. Are they living for them, or are they living for a greater good? Are they selfish, or are they giving? If that makes sense. Do they feel alone, or do they feel connected? It turns out that how one feels in a population, which is just a greater part of the greater community of the world, influences many different things. I could even say organ systems, but it's ultimately the cell. So if all we do is just focus on the person and the systems, we're going to fail people, because it turns out that, and this is well documented in the literature, that how one feels, what they're living for, themselves or for a greater good or a greater purpose, or if they feel alone and isolated, or they feel like they're a part of something bigger, influences cellular health. Okay, and that's pretty awesome. And then the second thing that I want to add, though, is the healthier the organism, the healthier the person, I believe that they make a better member of the population. I think that they don't hate people as much, and they don't want to kill people as much, and they're not as selfish, and they're more giving, and they're more loving, and they're more kind, and they're better citizens in the society, and they're better contributors, and they're more, like I said, more giving, and they make a better spouse, husband and wife. They make better parents, they make better employees, they make better teachers, they make better employers, they make better students. Okay? And so I say that because to put this, the levels of organization is in the first few pages of every physiology textbook, and it just gets glazed over by millions of people that take a physiology course every single year. But when you look at this, I think that there is a deep and profound clinical model that's found in this. And say, first of all, that we need to be cellular experts. And not only that, we need to be experts at determining why the cells aren't healthy in somebody. New supplements, new pathways, new organs are being discovered, new body parts are being discovered. All these things, we've been wrong in the past many times. Many times. Eggs are bad, now they're good, now they're bad again. Give me a break. Forget eggs, forget vitamin D, forget curcumin, forget genetic testing, forget the microbiome, forget all these things. It's about the cell. And if we focus on getting our patients healthy cells, sometimes it's not sexy things. Sometimes it's things like hydration or pH or micronutrient or multivitamin. But if we focus on healthy cells, then the healthier the cells of our patients or our clients, the healthier the tissues, the healthier the organs, the healthier the organ system, the healthier the organism. And in the levels of organization, the healthier person, the happier person, the more contributing, giving, kind, loving person they're going to be. And I think that makes the world a better place. So wait a minute. This little thing in the first few pages of a physiology textbook is telling me that if I have the ability to help improve the world by working on somebody's cells, now I'm going to stick with this profession for a little longer, if that makes sense. I'm not going to worry about the egos. I'm just going to do my own thing. because I feel like I have something to focus on now, and I don't care what the best supplement or diet or test or whatever fancy sparkly thing comes and distracts all the practitioners, and you see them get distracted by this stuff. Okay, so that's levels of organization. I've showed you that you can take a disease and put it backwards, and you can see how it's a cellular dysfunction at the most fundamental piece. So you can go in reverse and talk about how the cell, you can see the healthy cells make healthy tissues, organ system makes healthy organism, but also you can see that if we are healthy, we are better as people. But it turns out that we as people in this environment here, and you'll see this in a second, also relates back to our health as well. All this from this basic concept that's existed for a long time. It's, again, it only takes up a few pages in a textbook, but man, there's a great model here. So now let's take a quick break, and I'll talk a little bit more about all the different pieces of the cell blueprint.